Every old photograph can carry us into a world of days long gone. From the dramatic events of the time of the Second World War to the curious and touching moments of everyday life. Today, we will immerse ourselves in archival images of the past, and for the duration of your viewing, time stops existing for you. I wish you a pleasant viewing. In the early 40s of the last century, the young Albina Malihoar joined the Slovenian National Liberation Movement when she was only 16 years old. Just 1 year later, at a very young age, she took part in resisting the Nazi occupation and was even wounded twice. Her story embodies the resilience and selflessness of the youth who rose to defend their land in an extremely difficult time. A few years after the end of the Second World War, a German soldier returned home from Soviet captivity. This man had been drafted to the front when his child was not even 1 year old, and he returned only after nearly 10 years of separation. The photographer captured the moment of the father's reunion with his family, conveying the full range of emotions, from joy to the bitter realization of how much time had been lost. Once, a village resident was caught on camera painting white stripes on her brown cow. This was done for safety on dark roads, so that in low light conditions, drivers could spot the cow more quickly and avoid hitting it. During periods when street lighting was severely limited, measures like this saved both animals and vehicles from collisions. In the early 60s of the last century, an intrepid aircraft designer named George Arid nearly lost his life during a test flight. He was thrown literally sideways out of the plane and landed not far from the crash site, ending up on the grounds of an animal nursery. The fall resulted in fractures of both legs, but the pilot survived. This episode underscores just how courageous test pilots were during the era of rapid aviation development. In the late 60s, a photographer dared to take a historic shot: Soviet tanks rolling into Prague. The feat lay not only in pressing the camera shutter at the moment the city was seized by invading forces, but also in secretly smuggling the photograph beyond the borders of Czechoslovakia. Thus, the world saw direct evidence of the brutality of that operation. In the late 30s of the last century in Hexham, England, an unusual baby carriage was introduced. It was created to protect the child from poison gas. Fear of chemical weapons, dating back to the time of the First World War, pushed people to invent such devices. In the photo, one can see how a mother checks the carriage's airtightness and reliability, which at the time symbolized the grim forebodings of an impending global conflict. In the mid-30s in sunny California, beach volleyball was already being played in full swing. One image from the Venice Beach area shows athletes enjoying the warm weather and the competitive thrill. This seemingly simple scene reveals that despite the hardships of the Great Depression, people strove to preserve the joy of life. Another alarming image from that same decade shows a gigantic wall of dust rolling across the horizon in Texas, threatening to devour everything in its path. This is a reminder of harmful agricultural practices and years of drought, which turned vast areas into a dust bowl, forcing thousands of families to leave their homes. In the mid-20s, a policeman nicknamed Smokey Buchanan watched over the beaches of Palm Beach to ensure that women did not go beyond the bounds of morality. In the photograph, he measures Betty Fringle's swimsuit, checking whether it meets the rules. At that time, strictness toward women's swimwear caused both outrage and ridicule, yet reflected the moral values of that era. In the early 20s of the last century, explorers arrived on Easter Island, lost in the Pacific Ocean. One photo shows a group of people examining the giant Moai stone statues. These colossal figures, created by the island's ancient inhabitants, have always intrigued scholars, and their true purpose remains a mystery to this day. In the late 20s, in a Soviet village, Several peasants were photographed with great curiosity as they listened to the first radio receiver ever to appear in those parts. Their reactions are vividly conveyed. Some look excited, while others listen cautiously. Radio became a genuine window on the world, bringing news, music, and official propaganda to even the most remote corners of the country. At the very start of the last century, a German immigrant family consisting of parents and 8 children was photographed on Ellis Island in the United States of America. Like millions of other settlers, they arrived there in hope of a better life. At that time, Ellis Island served as a sort of gateway to a new destiny, promising the chance to build a future far from Europe's troubles. In the mid-30s, in Tokyo, a courier was captured controlling his bicycle with one hand while balancing several dozen boxes of soba noodles with the other. This variety of noodles has always been popular in Japanese culture, and the delivery workers who learned to balance all those boxes appear truly masterful. In the late 19th century, in the dense jungles of Honduras, a group of explorers came upon an ancient Mayan statue. The Mayan civilization continued to be revealed to scientists. Sculptures, ornaments, and inscriptions, hidden for centuries beneath layers of vegetation, shed light on the beliefs and customs of this mysterious people. In one town of the United Kingdom, a worker was photographed catching rats in underground tunnels. This difficult job was extremely important. In crowded cities, the threat of epidemics remained high, and rats could quickly spread dangerous diseases and spoil food supplies. The courageous efforts of such catchers often saved entire neighborhoods from catastrophe. During the First World War, in France, a scene was captured. A soldier takes a scroll from a dog that has just swum across a canal, performing the role of messenger. When regular communication methods became impossible, specially trained dogs would carry important messages across hazardous areas, saving countless lives and shaping the outcome of military operations. At the very beginning of the 20th century, a certain Chester Undafe from New York developed the first heavy diving suit using ball bearings. It allowed dives to extreme depths with increased mobility. The Daredevil made a record dive for those times of over 200 meters, demonstrating new possibilities for underwater researchers. A married couple photographed next to a tiny Bayerische Motorenwerke Isetta car reflects the spirit of the time after the Second World War. During a period when the economy was only just recovering, miniature cars with small fuel consumption were becoming very popular. The Isetta had an unusual design with a door at the front and compact dimensions, making it practical in crowded urban settings. Toward the end of the Second World War, a small number of survivors from concentration camps were freed from what was called a death train. The photo shows the moment of true freedom for people whom the Nazi regime had subjected to inhumane transport to extermination camps. Against the backdrop of the horrors of the Holocaust, such scenes of liberation became a symbol of hope and the beginning of a long road to healing. In the past century, some regions used an extraordinarily large gun called a punt gun. It was mounted on small boats and could take out several dozen ducks with one shot. While this hunting method seemed very effective, it dealt colossal damage to bird populations, and in the late 60s of the last century, such practices were banned. During the First World War, a British soldier wounded in battle was photographed taking bandages from a special Red Cross dog's backpack. These animals were trained to deliver medical supplies and provide minimal assistance in the most dangerous zones, where it was difficult for humans to reach. In the late 30s on the Mississippi River, one pearl diver invented a clever way to dive using a car gas tank as a sort of helmet. It created an air pocket inside, allowing him to stay on the riverbed in search of valuable pearls. This homemade construction showcases the resourcefulness and bravery of treasure hunters from days past. In the early 30s, an inventor from Italy named Davide Chisi introduced the world to a motorized single-wheel motorcycle. The unusual vehicle looked like a real challenge to conventional norms. It could balance and move on one large wheel, astonishing everyone with its unconventional design. In the spring of the late 30s, on a naval air station in one of the states of the United States of America, tragedy struck. The enormous German airship, Hindenburg, caught fire and crashed right before the stunned public. The loss of passengers and crew forced the world to reconsider the future of rigid airships, ending the era of these aerial giants that once seemed incredibly promising. In the early 50s on the Korean peninsula, there is a frightening photograph. Chinese soldiers, having surrendered, desperately beg a South Korean service member for mercy. The war had divided the peninsula into North and South, and the involvement of foreign powers made the conflict especially brutal. The scene conveys the tragedy of people who, realizing the futility of continued fighting, sought to save their lives. In the spring, during the final years of the First World War, British soldiers were photographed walking in a line toward a medical station, blinded by poisonous gas. The use of toxic substances on the battlefields became a terrible innovation of that war, leading to severe injuries of the lungs, skin, and eyes. This image is a stark reminder of the inhumanity of such weapons. In the mid-20th century, workers toiled tirelessly on the giant carved faces of United States presidents on Mount Rushmore. Each face reached a height of several dozen meters and required enormous precision in handling explosives and chisels. This monument became a symbol of the era's pride and enthusiasm for honoring the nation's great leaders. A photograph of youth in the middle of the 20th century gives us the opportunity to compare the lifestyle and fashion of that generation with today. They appear more reserved, in many ways conservative by modern standards, yet they still hold the spirit of emerging rock and roll and the sweeping changes to come. In the late 19th century, in a Dutch cemetery, a touching scene was recorded. The graves of a Catholic woman and her Protestant husband were divided by a stone wall, yet their headstone hands seemed to reach out to each other. This suggests that even religious constraints cannot break the true bond between two close souls. In the early second decade of the 20th century, painters hung at a tremendous height, painting the famous Brooklyn Bridge. Built in the century before last, it had become a symbol of technological progress, connecting the boroughs of one of the world's greatest cities. The photo reveals the courage of the workers who risked their lives to maintain the beauty and safety of the structure. In the first years of the 20th century, in Philadelphia, child laborers took to the streets in protest. Led by a labor activist known as Mother Jones, the children demonstrated against the terrible working conditions in factories and mines. They demanded an end to the exploitation of miners and the improvement of their living conditions. The brave action of these children caught the attention of the entire nation and sparked reforms in child labor. For employees of a famous theme park, there was a special cafeteria where they could rest and discuss their upcoming performances. Behind the scenes, the park's performers, known as cast members, exchanged stories and recharged before returning to the realm of make-believe. In the mid-30s, in one of Hamburg's docks, a ceremony took place involving Adolf Hitler. In the group photograph, people greet him with raised arms, but one's gaze is drawn to a man in the crowd, standing with folded arms. Later it became known that his name was August Landmesser. He refused to salute the leader because he had married a Jewish woman and faced persecution. The subsequent fate of Landmesser and his family turned out to be a tragic illustration of the cruelty of the Nazis' racial laws. In the late 50s, Elvis Presley was drafted into the Army of the United States of America. He was at the peak of his music career, but chose not to avoid military duty, further winning the admiration and respect of his fans. First, he completed training at one of the major military camps, then went on to serve in the western part of Germany. Presley's service demonstrated his dedication to duty and his ability to remain a down-to-earth individual even under the glare of fame. In the mid-30s in England, a sad story took place. The owner of a dog died, leaving the animal without a master. A group of local children took on the responsibility of caring for the dog, feeding it, and trying to comfort it. However, the expression on the dog's face made it clear that it still longed for the person it would never see again. The touching photo conveys the sorrow of a lost friend surrounded by the kindness of caring kids. During the Spanish flu, which raged at the very end of the second decade of the 20th century, a streetcar conductor in Seattle became known for his uncompromising position. No one was allowed aboard without a mask. In those days, when the pandemic had already claimed a huge number of lives, such measures were taken seriously. The city did everything possible to limit the transmission of the virus, and even public transport fell under strict control. During the Second World War, in conditions of extreme scarcity, any item became priceless. In one poignant photograph, an Austrian boy beams with happiness at receiving a new pair of shoes. His face shows pure wonder and delight, a rare moment of joy amid the hardships of war. In the second half of the 30s of the 20th century, an African-American sprinter named Jesse Owens set a new world record in the sprint, covering 200 meters in about 20.7 seconds. It all happened at the Olympic Games, conducted under the watchful eye of National Socialist propaganda. His triumph became a symbol of equality and strength of spirit, overturning notions of racial superiority. A series of photographs dated from the early to mid-second decade of the 20th century shows the culture and daily life of the indigenous tribes of North America. Depicted are clothing, traditions, and the natural landscapes in which these peoples lived through a challenging era of colonization and change. In the late 50s, an astonishing creature appeared in the legendary Times Square, a real llama. The city bustle and the bright lights of skyscrapers formed a striking contrast with the animal, as though it had wandered in from another world. This moment vividly shows just how varied the face of a metropolis can be. In the very early 50s, in one district of Chelsea, England, a little girl sat apart at a table during a coronation celebration. Certain distancing measures were in place to protect guests from possible infections. The contrast between the festive atmosphere and the lonely spot occupied by this girl heightened the overall sense of how fragile any celebration could be in the post-war years. In the 50s of the last century, the legendary Hollywood star Marilyn Monroe was captured on a beach in the United States of America. She was at the peak of her popularity, embodying the glamour and charm of the American film industry, although her life, as it turned out, was no less dramatic than the roles she portrayed on screen. In the mid-40s of the 20th century, a naval airship of the United States of America patrolled the Atlantic Ocean. Its mission was to detect enemy submarines, which posed a serious threat to maritime convoys. Airships, with their tremendous range and visibility, provided crucial assistance in naval reconnaissance. In the early 50s of the past century, a group of Second World War veterans gathered at one of the most revered military cemeteries of the United States of America in Arlington. There they honored the memory of comrades who did not return from the battlefields. Arlington is perceived as a sacred place, where anyone can lay flowers and recall those who sacrificed their lives. In the early 40s, American actress Susan Peters was photographed in sunny California. Young and full of energy, she was riding a bicycle. Unfortunately, a few years later, tragedy struck. She was wounded in a hunting accident that led to paralysis. Despite her struggles, her health declined, and she passed away quite early, leaving behind the sad echo of unfulfilled hopes. At the very start of the second decade of the 20th century, more than 100 people gathered around a single giant sequoia tree in California. That group photograph emphasized not only the size of the trees, some of which had lived for thousands of years, but also the awe inspired by nature's majesty, where a single trunk could accommodate such a large crowd. In the United States of America, in the early 20s of the last century, a family that had just passed a stringent inspection waited anxiously for the ferry to the shores of New York. Exhausted by the journey, yet full of dreams, they peered intently at the skyline of the immense city, which for many became a launch pad for a new, better life. In the early 40s, the residents of New York City gathered en masse in front of the New York Times building to follow the ticker news about a major military operation in Europe. By that point, the first waves of the landing had already come ashore under fierce fire. This day went down in history as a turning point in the struggle against Nazi occupation. In the 70s of the last century, at the foot of the famous Great Sphinx in Giza, archaeological work took place. Scientists discovered new details about the structure of this ancient Egyptian sculpture, attempting to restore lost elements and unravel the mysteries of its origin. This monument, with a lion's body and a human head, remains one of the planet's most enigmatic landmarks. A couple of decades after the end of the Second World War, an American veteran who had lost the ability to walk without special devices was photographed together with his child, gazing at the famous Golden Gate Bridge. That symbol of engineering genius underscored the resilience and hope for the future held by those who had paid a high price during wartime. In the late 19th century, an Italian monk was photographed wearing a peculiar headdress, a ritual funerary mask. This facial covering was associated with a ceremony honoring the dead, implying a connection between the world of the living and the departed. In those days, people strove to preserve the images of their loved ones, and such masks, though frightening to behold, reflected a deep reverence for memory. In the mid-40s of the last century, a group of Soviet schoolchildren managed to present the American ambassador with a decorative emblem in the shape of the United States of America, coat of arms. The ambassador happily accepted the gift and hung it in his office. Only a few years later did it become clear that a listening device was concealed within the emblem. This spy gift showcased the cunning methods of covert intelligence. In the summer of the final years of the First World War, British forces actively used homing pigeons. In one photograph, a soldier releases a pigeon from a special hatch in a tank's armor. Radio communication was still imperfect at that time, and pigeons were considered a reliable way to deliver vital messages, bypassing interference and enemy fire. In the mid-60s, during the Vietnam War, an unknown soldier posed in a helmet bearing the inscription, "War is Hell." The photo became a symbol of the inner turmoil experienced by each person caught in this bloody theater of conflict, where the line between life and death was a split second. In the late 60s, the Boston Marathon organizers tried to prevent Catherine Switzer from running the race, but she managed to finish anyway, proving that women are in no way inferior to men over long distances. Her participation not only challenged outdated views, but also became a milestone in the fight for gender equality in sports. In the summer before the start of the Second World War, Albert Einstein spent some time on a quiet American beach. He was already deeply involved in scientific and political discussions, including the writing of that famous letter to the President of the United States of America, in which the scientist warned of the risk that the Nazis might develop nuclear weapons. At the very end of the 19th century, in a laboratory in the state of Colorado, Nikola Tesla was photographed alongside an amplifying transformer, a special version of his well-known coil device. He studied the possibility of wireless transmission of electricity. These daring experiments became the foundation of many future technologies, far ahead of their time. In the late 50s, the world-famous actress Audrey Hepburn visited a supermarket in Beverly Hills not alone, but with her pet fawn named Ip. Hepburn had taken it in during a film shoot and never parted with this innocent creature, making her image even more touching and unique. In the early 30s of the last century, the Parisian landmark required regular care. Painters, working without modern safety equipment, hung at a dizzying height as they refreshed the paint on the metal structures. Looking at this photograph, one cannot help but admire the bravery of the people who became custodians of France's symbol. Soon after the wars ended, genuine exoticism arrived in a northern country: bananas. For Norwegians, who were not very familiar with tropical fruits, it was a truly remarkable event. The appearance of overseas produce hinted at the globalization of trade and gradually changing dietary habits. Toward the end of the Second World War, American pilots often wrote scathing messages on their aerial bombs addressed to Adolf Hitler. These captions, akin to Easter eggs, served as moral support for the troops and mocked the Nazis. The psychological effect of such signatures boosted morale and instilled fear in the enemy. In the early 50s, the legendary drink from the United States of America began to conquer the hearts of Europe at breakneck speed. In France, many people tried the carbonated symbol of the American lifestyle for the very first time. This event was a vivid example of cultural expansion, illustrating how quickly one concept or brand can spread worldwide. In the early 60s of the last century, all of Cuba had already experienced a revolutionary wave, and its leaders Fidel Castro and Che Guevara are captured in one photo calmly fishing, as though nothing more important existed. Yet the entire world already knew. These men had upended the region's political map, inspiring some and frightening others with their ideas. The famous shot, "Into the Jaws of Death," was taken by photographer Robert F. Sargent during the landing of troops on the Normandy coast. Soldiers of the United States of America, disembarking under intense gunfire, understood that the outcome of the entire operation depended on their bravery. This moment opened the way to Europe's liberation from Nazi occupation. In the early 40s, air raids on London left behind ruins and fragments of everyday life. In one photo, a little girl with a doll sits amid the rubble of what used to be her home. The contrast between a child's toy and the wreckage of a building conveys all the pain and fear brought by aerial bombings. At the very end of the 19th century, in Athens, the first revived Olympic Games took place. Photographs show runners tackling the challenging course inspired by ancient legends. A Greek victor became a local hero, as the return of the Hellenic marathon tradition was a point of national pride. During the Second World War, in Port Washington, New York, a group of women worked on making propaganda posters. They painted calls to purchase war bonds, save food, and maintain morale. Their efforts showed how many women took responsibility on the home front while men were away at war. During the German occupation of France, a resistance member named Georges Blind was captured by the invaders. In a photograph taken seconds before his execution, he smiles. This extraordinary gesture became a symbol of courage, of a willingness to die for the freedom of one's country, and of an unbreakable spirit in the face of death. A photograph shows safety inspectors hanging on special platforms high above the city fog, checking the condition of a skyscraper's walls and windows. Their task was to ensure building safety during a period of rapid urban growth. The work was extremely dangerous, but it allowed metropolises to rise without becoming deadly traps for residents. On a beach in Miami, in the mid-30s, a group of young women decided to poke fun at a stern sign banning overly revealing swimsuits. Their poses and joyful faces showed that the youth of that time was not afraid to challenge official morality and craved freedom of expression. In one town, when prisoners of war were brought there after the Second World War, a local woman wept, trying to learn something, anything, about her missing son. She showed a photograph to a soldier, hoping he would recognize the young man. Sadly, no answer was given, leaving her in agonizing uncertainty. In the early 20s of the last century, archaeologist Howard Carter discovered the tomb of Pharaoh Tutankhamun in the Valley of the Kings. An unbroken seal, undisturbed for thousands of years, was still on the door. This discovery became one of the greatest in Egyptology, for inside the tomb were countless treasures and household objects, shedding light on the life and culture of ancient Egypt. In the mid-60s of the 19th century, at Edgware Road in London, the first underground railway line was launched. Its introduction proved to be a genuine revolution in urban transport. Thousands of people could now get to work and home more quickly. Although the first trains were powered by steam, this marked the start of an entire era of metro development around the world. 1.5 years before worldwide fame, the now legendary Liverpool Quartet performed in some club before a tiny audience. Only a few listeners saw this unremarkable band, which would soon become one of the most influential musical groups on the planet. Thus began the Beatles' climb to the pinnacle of popularity. At the very start of the 20th century, in the English port of Southampton, the luxurious transatlantic liner Titanic was photographed. Back then, it was considered a marvel of shipbuilding, thanks to its grand size, magnificent interiors, and daring engineering solutions. But within just a few days, the Titanic struck an iceberg and sank, taking thousands of lives and leaving an unforgettable mark on history. The most recent surviving photograph of the Titanic, taken shortly before the tragedy, shows the ship in its pristine form. Soon it disappeared beyond the ocean horizon and ended up in the cold depths of the Atlantic. The sinking of the Titanic became one of the most notorious maritime disasters, compelling the world to reevaluate safety standards at sea. A boy named Ned Parfitt, holding a newspaper on a London street, stands by a headline announcing the sinking of the Titanic. It is remarkable that such a young newsboy already grasped the scale and tragedy of what had happened. This photograph became one of the symbols of the shock that gripped society. During the First World War, men were conscripted en masse, and women had to take on difficult and sometimes dangerous occupations. Thus, in some cities, blocks of ice for preserving food were delivered precisely by women. Without modern refrigeration, people depended on shipments of ice chunks, and these women contributed to maintaining normal life. At the very start of the 20th century, American cavalrymen posed beside the colossal grizzly giant tree in Yosemite National Park. This natural wonder, one of the region's most famous, impressed visitors with its enormous size and centuries-old age. In the late 40s, the United States of America still felt the aftermath of the Great Depression. The Shifu family, threatened with eviction, resorted to a desperate measure. They put their children up for sale. A shocking photo with a sign reading, "Children for Sale," instantly spread throughout the country, sparking both outrage and compassion. Sadly, the fate of those children was filled with hardship and pain, illustrating how despair can drive people to terrible decisions. At the very beginning of the Great Patriotic War, When German forces drew close to Kyiv, Stalin received news of the breakthrough. In an informal photograph, one sees the Soviet leader, having just heard the report, plunged into grim contemplation. The fall of Kyiv threatened a serious blow to the country's positions and caused deep alarm among the top leadership. In early summer, after the fighting in Europe had subsided, gigantic posters bearing Stalin's likeness were hung throughout the defeated German capital. One German passerby stopped to stare at the portrait with distrust. Berlin, divided among the Allies, was undergoing colossal restructuring and changing its face, a transformation that could be felt everywhere. In the late 60s of the last century, a massive crowd gathered on a huge field near the town of Bethel in the state of New York. The festival, known as Woodstock, brought together hundreds of thousands of people who advocated peace, love, and freedom. Through music and an atmosphere of liberation, Woodstock went down in history as the pinnacle of counterculture and the banner of the flower children generation. So ends our fascinating journey through rare historical shots. Each of these glimpses reminds us just how multifaceted and unpredictable the history of humankind truly is. Behind a serene smile, tragedies often lie hidden. Behind dark events, there can be flashes of hope. Leave your comments, subscribe to the Top Facts channel, and watch our previous episodes right now, which have appeared on your screen.